It's Thursday, January 16th. I'm Matt Harmon. Welcome to the Yahoo Fantasy Forecast, and it is a hell of a day to talk ball. One of the best weekends of the NFL season. It is the divisional round. It is a playoff preview show, and joining me to do just that is my good pal, Scott Pianowski. Scott, what's going on, buddy?
Not much, man. Hoping for a better week of playoff games. I think we'll get it. Washington, Tampa Bay delivered last week, but everything else was pretty much a snoozer. But, you know, when you get a week like that, usually you get back to the better teams are in play this week. Obviously, we welcome the Chiefs and the Lions back for their home games as one seeds. That Baltimore-Buffalo game we've all had circled on our calendars. So week one did not really deliver outside of Washington, Tampa, but I'm excited for what I think will be a great divisional round.
I am very excited as well. We have 4 great games to preview. This is going to follow basically the same structure as our preview show last week, where we talked through the games, big previews, whatever, in the first segment, in the second segment, third segment. We're going to do a little prop it up. We're going to talk props and obviously stuff all throughout the course of the show, but we'll talk through 4 in the prop it up segment that we really like in that portion of the show. Scott, hopefully we don't have any more heartbreakers like our first quarter under in the Eagles-Packers game last week. Man, that one tore me up from going to, hey, I thought we were screwed right away when the fumble quote unquote happened on the kickoff, and then 19 seconds left, Jalen Hurts gets him into a field goal there. That was a pretty that was a frustrating one because we knew the under in some way, shape, or form was going to be a good play, and I know that you sided to the under for the whole game, which turned out to be the right play. But it's not satisfying to say right side, wrong outcome. But it took a opening game controversial fumble. I'm not even sure that was a fumble or a recovery for the Eagles on the opening play. And then the Eagles to not run the ball 1 out of 3 snaps near the goal line at the end of the first quarter. Any run would have drained the clock as long as it didn't go for a touchdown. So, this is the life we've chosen. Anybody who plays fantasy football or watches football with any stake in it knows that sometimes your difference between winning and losing is very narrow, and it comes down to kind of quirky things. So opening kickoff happened. I had a pit in my stomach. We still got a sweat out of it. And I still feel like it was the right side. I know that the right side does not give you anything at the window. So, I'm eating fast food this week and not steak dinners. But, let's try to get some of it back in the divisional. Exactly. And hey, that's why we're back doing the show, because Scott and I couldn't retire early on our winnings from the first quarter under. But alas, hey, I think it's a great show here that we got ahead of us because we got 4 great games to talk through. And let's waste no more time. Let's get into the very first one, which is the Saturday, 4:30 p.m. The Texans window. The Texans are right in it again. We've got Houston Texans at Kansas City Chiefs. We have a 41.5 point total. We have the Chiefs as 8.5 point home favorites. Let's start when the Texans have the ball, Scott. What are we looking at from a team in Houston here that obviously tough matchup anytime you got to go into Kansas City, but they are coming off of a really nice week. I would say on both sides of the ball, of course, more their defense, but let's talk through their offense when they have the ball. What are we looking at here?
Yeah, maybe the outcome that surprised me the most, although, man, I could talk about the Vikings for about 3 hours, but Houston is playing poorly, getting outplayed, getting outcoached, and then the game totally flips on that dropped snap where Stroud makes something out of a play that looked dead in the water. He throws that long pass to Hutchinson. Houston has to work around a patchwork offensive line. I think it might be the worst offensive line that's still in the playoffs. And there may be a misunderstanding. This is not an unbelievable Chiefs defense with their 12th in DVOA, 17th pass, 9th of rush. They are blitz heavy. They're the 4th heaviest blitz team in the NFL this year. So I think Joe Mixon, actually, I know he's not a special receiver, but he had an uptick in routes run last week. It didn't actually lead to a lot of production. But I think Houston needs Mixon to do 2 things in this game. One, he just needs to be productive in the sense that let's matriculate the ball down the field a little bit. Let's shorten the game. Let's not give Kansas City a bunch of possessions. Let's give our defense time to rest, all that stuff. But also, how do you slow down a pass rush, or a blitz-happy pass rush? You do it in the screen game. And again, Mixon was a good receiver at his peak. He's not at his peak now. He's on the back 9 of his career. But I think Mixon needs to be. They do not want C.J. Stroud to throw 35 or 40 passes in this game. If that happens, it's gone really bad. Kansas City has raced out to a big lead, and Bobby Slowick has had to come up with a game plan he doesn't want. So I think Joe Mixon is going to get 20 to 25 touches in this game against the Kansas City defense. I think might be a little bit overrated.
I like your call out on the Chiefs defense there. We'll break down some of the interesting things from them, particularly in this game. But yeah, I think Joe Mixon, I really like, and I've been hard on Bobby Slowick all year, but I really like what they did in this past game. Even if it was a little bit of a slow start for the Houston Texans offense generally, they did pick things up. Obviously, when CJ Stroud makes that play on the messed up snap there that you talk about. Also, Andy's done a great job throughout the course of the postseason talking about, hey, it always comes down to these one or two plays that flip things. And hey, if Derwin James actually comes down with that interception in the end zone, we might be talking about a very different outcome here for that particular game. That was a big turning point moment. But I like that my point here is that I like that the Texans offense, and particularly Bobby Slowick, kind of went against type last week, where they passed to get the lead and then set up the run and then ran it out. Whereas they've usually been the inverse, kind of stubbornly running, first and second down, and then kind of putting CJ Stroud in these impossible situations on third down. I think that has to be the plan again here, because as you mentioned, the Chiefs blitz a lot, and this Texans offensive line, I think some due to personnel, but a lot due to coaching and just the protection plan. They do not pick up blitzes well. They do not pick up stunts well, and you don't want to be in a third down situation. The Chiefs actually flip from being very man-heavy on first and second down to they drop to 17th in man coverage on late downs, which is usually the inverse. We actually usually see teams' man coverage rates go up on late downs. The Chiefs are the opposite, because they'll throw all these funky zone coverage looks on the back of these big-time blitzes. That's not the position you want to find yourself in if you're the Texans offense.
No. Again, it's so important for Houston to play a game with leverage here and not have Kansas City's defense and the score dictating the terms. And the other thing we have to figure out is, look, Nico Collins is fabulous, and he was a game breaker in the Charger game. But what is the second pitch for this passing game? I talked about Mixon getting involved. I mean, that may be 3 to 5 catches. Yeah. He only had 13 receiving yards last week. But can John Mechie make a play? Can Xavier Hutchinson do that one long catch but nothing else make a play? Can Dalton Schultz? We know at times the Chiefs have had seam coverage problems, but it hasn't been a great Schultz season. We're all in on Nico Collins, but if the Texans win this game, somebody else in this receiver room or this tight end room needs to make a big play. And I'm not sure who it is, and I probably wouldn't side to any of the props. And even if you're playing DFS on that 2-day Saturday slate, you're a better man than I. All the gold is yours if you can find out that this is the Xavier Hutchinson game or the John Mechie game or the Cade Stover game, whatever it is. But there's going to have to be somebody else in that passing tree other than Collins is going to get his. I think Collins will easily get over 80 yards and will probably be double-digit targeted in this game. That's another recipe Houston probably has to follow. But, Matt, can we get a second pass catcher downfield who makes an impact in this game?
Well, that you're right, that's really kind of the key question here. And they did try to get John Mechie going early in that game against the Chargers, and the results were pretty poor. He had a fumble, he had a drop, and he had some, like I said, he had some targets early, probably trying to exploit some matchups in that Chargers game. But I just don't have a lot of confidence in Mechie as a player. I don't have a lot of confidence in, the Robert Woodses of the world at this point, the Xavier Hutchinsons of the world at this point. But it's tough because schematically, that's kind of how you want. You mentioned the Chiefs have had some issues up the seam. They've allowed the second fewest yards and second fewest receptions to wide receivers lined up out wide, but they've actually been pretty beatable in the slot. The problem is that Nico Collins is a pure outside receiver. He actually led the NFL despite missing time this year with 545 yards according to Next Gen Stats when he was lined up as an ISO wide receiver. He's just one of the best X's in the league right now. But those are the types that Kansas City has not really given up a lot of production to. I would expect, Scott, that we're going to see a lot of manufactured touches to Nico Collins, which is kind of what we got. He had a high reception game when these two teams played last time. Obviously, it was Tank Dell that went off, and it proved to be his final game of the season. So I do see, if I'm betting on a Nico Collins prop, it's going to be the over-under on 6.5 catches, because I think he's going to have 7-8 catches in this game. I'm not sure if he's going to break a long one.
And also, they need CJ Stroud, who has not had a great season. He played about half of a really good game against the Chargers. CJ Stroud, for Houston to win this game, it's obviously the Chiefs are heavy favorites. CJ Stroud has to have one of his 3 or 4 best games of the season. He has to have a 2023 CJ Stroud game. And maybe Bobby Slowick needs to have a 2023 Bobby Slowick game.
I agree. And what's your confidence level that happens, scale of 1 to 10?
I think everybody's probably at a 2, something like that, a low number.
I might give it a 4. like a 4 after what we saw
I was gonna
last
say 2
week.
to 3. So I mean, you can with you saying 4, I'll nudge it up to 3. I'm a
cool. We'll settle at 3 out of 10, which is not very confident that these guys can have that. And I still think Stroud is going to be fine in the long term. Like, I don't come out of this season worried about Stroud. I am a little worried about the structure of the offense sort of holding him back, but we also need to see CJ Stroud get into creation mode, I think, in this game. That's going to be paramount. And we did see a little bit of that. Like, I'm at least interested in the CJ Stroud rush attempts prop or maybe a rushing yards prop, but they are like 3.5 rush attempts, 14.5 rushing yards. I don't love that, but I do think we're going to need to see some CJ Stroud creation mode in this game.
Yeah, we're always talking about, the quarterbacks being more proactive running late in the season or in the playoffs because there's nothing to save yourself for. And in the last 6 games that Stroud played that counted, because he obviously hardly played in the Week 18 game, 5 of those 6, he's beaten what his rushing prop is currently at. So I would think Stroud is athletic too. I mean, the idea, one of the reasons we liked him so much is that when he would break the pocket last year, he'd do it to make a big play, to look downfield, eyes focused. We love that. Greg Cosell's always talking about that. In this game, if they're chasing it second half, it's going to be a case of he's just going to have to run for survival. He's going to have to run to get a 5-yard first down that nobody's open. This is all I can do. I got to maybe go head first or take a hit. It's part of it. So I think CJ Stroud will easily go over his rushing prop. Just the way the game, as a heavy underdog, it's a January game, it's a playoff game. You just see that urgency get ramped up at this time of year. So I think Stroud's rushing prop is a good punch.
I like it. We said it last week that if the Texans were going to win this game, it was going to have to be a Nico Collins game. It turned out to be a massive Nico Collins game, right? He had a couple of those classic big in-breakers. That did feel very 2023 CJ Stroud, Nico Collins, like hitting on those big in-breaking patterns. It's going to have to happen in this game. I know that seems like simple. Hey, you're one of your best players, if not your best player, certainly on the offensive side of the ball, is going to have a big game for them to compete in this one. But that is really the case here. And I do come back to, like, if early in this game, my confidence level is going to be a lot higher in the Texans. Maybe I bump that 3 to a 5. That they can have a more, maybe even a 6, that they can have a more vintage performance if we see like a first down pass, right? First snap that they have the ball, that they go into a first down pass play, especially because of that flip that I mentioned there, where Kansas City plays a lot of man coverage on early downs. That's what you want to hit. You want to hit Nico on those in breakers against man coverage. So if we see that, maybe my confidence level in this Texans team and Stroud and Slowick goes up to like a 5 or a 6.
Totally fair.
All right, let's move to when the Kansas City Chiefs have the ball. Lots to talk about with Kansas City here. We haven't seen them since Christmas, at least the full unit here. We obviously did see this team play the Texans not too long ago. But, man, Scott, I will say that all of the kind of feelings I had about the Chiefs offense at times this year, I don't really feel that way anymore. I actually have a lot of confidence in the Chiefs offense now that they have Marquise Brown back, who we'll talk about, and several other things. But to me, my confidence level is higher in the Chiefs offense than I probably thought it was going to be at this point. When they have the ball, what are your eyes on?
Yeah, I feel better about them too. I mean, just having the personnel the way they want it. You talk about Brown coming back. Xavier Worthy has taken a late season jump forward, not unlike what we saw last year from Rashee Rice, different type of receiver, of course, but they've been more proactive with Worthy, and he was plenty involved. You mentioned that the last time these teams played wasn't that long ago. It was a 27-19 Chiefs win. They're part of that Foursquare holiday tournament that the NFL ran, where they had the Saturday games. This was that Saturday game on the 21st, and then the opponent shifted, and they all played on Christmas. They played different teams. So this is, and man, December 21st, I had to look that up. I'm like, I felt like that game was like Halloween or something. I mean, I didn't realize it was that recently, but that's just the way that's how the NFL works. Texans defense is good. I don't think people give it enough credit. I mean, they're third in DVOA, they're third against the run, third against the pass. They're 6th best in YPA allowed. They're 4th in sacks. So how do you win this game? They're 3rd in takeaways. Okay, take about Matt Burke, defensive coordinator, pride of Hudson, Massachusetts. Get a New England reference there if I can.
There we go.
If the Texans, are going to win this game, right? You have to rattle Mahomes' cage, get him off his spot, maybe get a turnover. And Mahomes, he's not been the precision Patrick Mahomes. I know they won the Super Bowl last year. I know he played better in the playoffs, but we talked about it all fantasy season. Patrick Mahomes was just another guy in fantasy, and it's not satisfying to say that. but now he finally has the toy. He was three-wheeling it for a while. I mean, now he's got the four wheels on the car. Just having Brown to run all those stretch routes and all those combination routes with other people is so advantageous. And I really like what they've done with Worthy. They even have both of their backs healthy, Hunt and Pacheco. It's really difficult to know. I think it might be just a hot hand situation or whoever's fitting the flow of the game more. I think both will get an opportunity to run. They don't feel locked into anybody, which is not satisfying for fantasy. But again, nebulous backfield, that's where the gold is a lot. It's so strange that, Matt, the Chiefs have had so many of their Super Bowl teams and their teams that have made deep runs have been just star-studded. Mahomes is an MVP and Travis Kelce's dominating at tight end, and Tyreek Hill was here for so long. And they don't – everybody now is just kind of like a B. Not that collectively that doesn't make a really good offense, not that we don't trust Mahomes. They're the best third down team in the league, which is important. And I think that's a reflective stat. Some people poo-poo that. I know the goal is to make a first down early in the sequence of down, so you never get to third down, but they're better than everybody else when it comes to third down. And that certainly is a Mahomes and Andy Reid stat. But I'm curious to see if they get Hollywood Brown loose, or just even how they use him, even if he's just a cardio guy, even if he's just running those 9 routes just to impact the deeper defensive back, just to get the safeties to commit, and then they do some underneath stuff to Worthy. Is playoff Travis Kelce going to be a thing? He just had a very mediocre season. I ranked him 7th, 8th, or 9th, I think, for the next coming season at tight end. You can go see our top 12 rankings for 2025 way too early. I know Matt did the wide receivers, as you would expect. He's our wide receiver guru, but Travis Kelce, this could be his last thing, right? I don't know. I wouldn't even be surprised if he retired after this year. He's in his mid-30s. He's taken a bunch of hits. They were really careful with load management with him during the season. So it used to be the Chiefs with a donut shop where you got the 2 or 3 donuts. You knew what your donut was. Now they're, dozen donuts and you're ordering like 10 different things.
My guess is that this probably is Kelce's last run. And I mean, last postseason he turned it on, right?
Monster.
We had the same conversations, and maybe a little more dramatic this year, but we had basically the same conversations last year about Kelce, where in the regular season he wasn't really doing anything, and then late in the year and especially in the postseason he absolutely kicked it off here. If you're looking to trail that narrative, which it is a narrative, but if you're looking to trail that, I mean, 53.5 receiving yard over under for him in this game, 5.5 catches at -145. Like, there's not, you're taking a lot of juice there, but at the same time, I do expect him to probably get a lot of receptions, especially because this Texans team, the defense is really good. I think maybe we should have focused more on that in that match. And we did talk a little bit about it, but we should have maybe talked about that Texans defense from like the premium positions. They're just so good at them. Number one, the pass rush is absolutely electric, right? Will Anderson, Danielle Hunter, those guys screaming off the edge, that's at least something to pay attention to, because we don't even know right now who's going to play left tackle for the Kansas City Chiefs, right? Andy Reid was kind of coy, as you'd expect, on whether DJ Humphries or Joe Thuney, their all-pro guard, is going to kick out to left tackle. Humphries has had some time with the team, but he's also dealt with injuries. He's coming off of an injury. And Thuney has just been good when they put him at left tackle. He's kind of just steadied that spot. But you're also getting worse at guard. Do you want the interior to be really strong? I think that's, again, we're not going to know that here on Thursday. We might know it a little closer to Sunday, but that's a key matchup to watch. And the Texans secondary, incredibly good. According to Next Gen Stats, Kamari Lassiter, 43.7%, Derek Stingley, 47.5%, allowed the lowest and second lowest completion percentage among defenders with at least 50 targets faced this season, including the playoffs. That's where the Hollywood Brown X factor is going to matter a lot to me, because he only played 34.4% of the team snaps when he played this year, but he was out wide on 23 of those 44 snaps, while the other 21 have come in the slot. The fact that he's a move around guy, I think trying to get him some vertical shots from the slot, where the Texans have had, they play a lot of nickel, but they've also dealt with injuries at that spot. That's going to be a pretty key matchup instead of just trying to slice him on the perimeter.
Totally fair. I also just have to mention the Chiefs are 11th in point differential. It is so strange to see a number 1 seed living like the Chiefs. We all know the stories by heart, right? Isaiah Likely's toe on opening day, Kyle Pitts interference, they didn't call it. Teams getting field goals blocked, teams getting field goals botched. The Raiders, the way they mishandled that end game when they could have beaten the Chiefs somehow in Kansas City. Bill Parcells and Bill Belichick and Bob Knight and all those older coaches would say, well, the team that screws up the least is the team that wins. Games are lost more often than they're won. And the Chiefs a lot of times just hang around and play an ordinary game and just wait for the other team to screw up. And is that a skill? Is that a repeatable skill? When somebody wins all these close games, like, well, they're clutch. They know how to do just enough to win. Or is it they're just playing with 9 lives and eventually this is going to bite you? What I think is going to bite them. It's just not going to bite them this week. I think they're going to lose next week to the Baltimore Buffalo winner. And maybe that's me wishing it into existence. What is it, Matt? Patrick Mahomes is great. Andy Reid's a Hall of Famer, and Mahomes is going there, and Kelsey's is going there. I have nothing against these guys other than I don't want to see the same team win every year. I understood it when, as a New England fan, when the Patriots were winning constantly, people were sick of that. They didn't want to see Brady's face anymore. They want to hear from Belichick, and they had nothing more than the Patriots to lose and lose in a humiliating fashion if possible. I don't need the Chiefs to be humiliated. I just want them to lose to somebody, for crying out loud, because I'm just frustrated that they have a record that I don't think they fully deserve. But maybe it's me. Maybe I'm the last person to accept that they have the clutch gene, and I'm getting too stat heavy, or I'm getting too modern analytic heavy, and I need to just stick to the narrative. Back to Parcells, he also said you are what you are with your win-loss record. Where do you come down on the lucky Chiefs?
Yeah, I do think a lot of it is skill, though. I mean, the third down stuff, which, by the way, Texans are the 7th best defense in success rate allowed on third down. So again, this Texans defense needs to have another lights out performance. D'Amico Ryans, Matt Burke, you mentioned those guys need to have another lights out performance in order for them to get past this kind of giant here, because I do think some of it is skill based, like not screwing it up, just being calm in those moments for Kansas City is part of it is luck, right? But all champions have some level of luck to them. We certainly talk about it from a fantasy perspective. You need a little luck to win in the fantasy postseason. I think you need a little luck to win an NFL championship. You certainly need to stay healthy. And that's where I come down to Kansas City now, is that they're healthier. Obviously the offensive line is something to pay attention to, but they have 2 potential answers there with Humphreys and Tooney. That gives me a lot of faith. I think that this team has gotten lucky at times. There's really probably no debating that, but at the same time, there is a lot of skill in just knowing how to win these close games and knowing how to do just enough, which has been the case for Kansas City all season long.
I'm going to throw out one other prediction. If the Houston Texans should shock the world and win the AFC and go to the Super Bowl, I think the NFL is going to move the Super Bowl to Saturday.
Really? Yeah, that's a good prediction.
Because the Houston Texans, they've inherited the Andy Dalton, Marvin Lewis Saturday game, right? Texans are available. Okay, we get an afternoon game for Saturday. How do you feel about that, guys?
How many people are going to be happy about that? I mean, shoot, another reason to root against the Chiefs. The Super Bowl on Saturday. You don't have to go to work hungover on a Monday. I think people are going to be rooting for that.
Obviously, I'm just being silly here, but it is funny how they just own this time slot. It's just, I think we all knew even before the schedules came out, right? Even before the cards were turned up on the table, Mike McD knew that KGB had the pocket aces.
All right, let's give a prediction.
That's Rounders, Matt. You haven't seen Rounders, right?
Yeah, no, obviously, no, I've not.
Where's
seen
Frank Schwab? Can we get Frank Schwab in here for 10 minutes of Rounders? Producer Colin, is he available?
I was going to say, I think we've done Rounders on the show before. I think this has come up with Frank on the show, and I was right over my head.
Yeah, I'm Earl Monroe. I need my Clyde Frazier. He's not here. But Matt will. Matt's a great point guard. Matt knows how to distribute the ball.
I suppose so. All right, let's pick this game. Where are we at? Again, Chiefs 8.5 point favorites. What do we think?
Chiefs by a touchdown.
So you're by a touchdown. So you're taking Texans plus.
Houston gets the money. Kansas City gets the win. In fact, you know what? This is maybe totally convenient, but I'm going to go with the same 27-19 score we saw on December 21st. Game will be different, but 27-19. I like it. The Texans will be in this game. And then Houston will just do something dumb. They'll make a bad 4th down decision, or Stroud, who's played a clean game to this point, will panic and make a throw they shouldn't make, or there'll be a tip pass and Kansas City will run it back for a touchdown. In fact, I think that's actually a good chance the Kansas City defense has a good score in this game. The Chiefs will win by 8 points. The 8 is that still? Yeah, I'll go with 8. That's still a Houston cover, right? It's 8.5 is the spread.
I think I'm going to go Chiefs minus 8.5. I think they're just a better team than the Texans. A little more professional, put together team than the Texans. I don't like the way Nico Collins matches up with this defense, although I think he will beat the 6.5 catches. I also think Marquise Brown's going to go over 39.5 yards, which is his over under on BetMGM. I think I do like the Kelsey over 5.5 catches, but ultimately I think Chiefs win and Chiefs cover.
Oh, I like that Kelsey prop a lot too, because again, Mahomes on third down, you can just see a lot of 8-yard Kelsey zone beaters on third down. That sounds really good to me.
All right, let's go to the next game here on Saturday. Washington Commanders at Detroit Lions. Beefy over-under, as you'd expect, 55.5 points. The Commanders are 9.5 road dogs here. This one's interesting, man. Let's talk about when the Commanders have the ball, Scott. What a performance by Jaden Daniels last week.
Man, I could talk about Jaden Daniels, throat permitting, for about 3 or 4 hours too. You see his reaction to the game-winning field goal. He was just as cool as a cucumber. And I think I posted about this on Twitter. Didn't get a lot of engagement. Maybe I put it up at the wrong time. But I think that no pulse, the coolest guy, the Iceman, right? Think about how important it is to be grace under pressure. When you're doing anything stressful, you're an editor on copy deadline. You're a fighter pilot. You're driving in gridlock traffic, whatever it is. You need to be cool. And man, is Jaden Daniels cool. And he's also, of course, mobile. The Lions have allowed the 4th most rushing yards to opposing quarterbacks. We saw Josh Allen just absolutely carve them up about a month ago. How much of the Lions' defensive mojo did they get back? This is so hard to tell, Matt. When games are lopsided, did one side play lousy? Did one side play great? How much of it is usually a little of both? But, how much credit, how much blame, right? The last time we saw the Lions, defense was fantastic. They had some key personnel back, including Anzalone, one of their best linebackers. Aaron Glenn had a great game dialing up pressure, but Sam Darnold, of course, on his 2 games, Sam Darnold, let's ruin my huge contract I was probably going to get or whatever. I don't know what to do with Sam Darnold now. I know you and Andy already talked about that, but that's for a different show. But the Lions defense was great for 4, 5, 6 weeks. Hutchinson gets hurt. The team photo eventually gets hurt. They've started to get pieces back. We know they want to hit you. They have the 3rd most quarterback knockdowns per Pro Football Reference. They're 4th in pressure rate percentage per Pro Football Reference. So they want to get to the pocket. They want to get Jaden Daniels hit off his spot. They want to break his confidence if they can, but the problem is they play a lot of man too. And what is man horrible for? You get gouged by the running quarterbacks. The defenses have their backs turned, and Daniels. It's interesting. I thought Tampa Bay actually did a great job of defending Daniels against the run last week, and his prop didn't hit, even though they did do some designed runs. But the personnel, of course, in the Tampa Bay defense is different, and I think maybe easier schematically for them to do that. I'm afraid, as a adopted Lions fan, New England transplant, has been here for a couple of decades. Love this team. If they're going to, this is very basic, but if the Lions lose this game, it's going to be because Jaden Daniels just did something crazy for 3 hours, and he's capable of doing that. And because the Lions, again, don't have their full team photo on defense, because they've struggled against mobile quarterbacks, because Aaron Glenn is a risk taker, the Vikings did not make him pay for any of those risks really 2 weeks ago. I think Washington's going to make some big plays in this game, and I think they're very live despite the heavy spread.
I think they're very live in this game too. And what you talked about in that Week 18 game with Sam Darnold, to use your phrase from the previous game, they really rattled his cage, right? They really rattled that cage, and then obviously it got rattled once again in the wild card round against the LA Rams, basically with the same game plan too, by the way, which is let's just play a ton of man coverage. Let's play a ton of cover one. Let's press these receivers at the line, and that extra half second or two is going to be enough for us to bring Sam Darnold to the turf. Jaden Daniels is not, he's not rattleable, if that's a word. At least we haven't seen it so far during his rookie season, right? That he can be rattled by anything here. And there's a lot of schematic matchups that I think go into Washington's favor from a defensive perspective. Now, before I say any of this, I do want to say, Aaron Glenn is a great defensive coordinator. I think he, in terms of, did the offense screw up or did he dominate the offense in Week 18? I think the answer is more that the Lions defense dominated that game, and they did it in a way with a bunch of backups, right? Amik Robertson playing single coverage on Justin Jefferson. It's going to be interesting to transplant that to this game, but you bring up the quarterback run game, which I think is a really important part of this here, because of course we'll talk about this. The Lions play the most man coverage in the league, 45% according to Fantasy Points data. Jaden Daniels leads all quarterbacks with 22 scrambles versus man coverage, and second in scramble yards against man coverage, 168 this year. Also from Fantasy Points data, they tweeted this out. The 3 teams with the highest read option usage all play this weekend. Number one is the Commanders at 34%, which is a big lead on the Ravens at 26% and the Eagles at 22%. And yards per carry on read options by their opponents, the Lions have allowed the second most yards per carry, 6.83 yards per carry to teams on read option plays. So I feel like the quarterback run game, Jaden Daniels, 56.5 rushing yards, 10.5 rush attempts, -110, -120 respectively. Those are both in play against this Lions defense.
Yeah, you have to. There's a lot of different ways to punch it, but you have to. Jaden Daniels' rushing prop has to be in your future. Whether it's the attempts, it's the yards, it's the longest run, it's the anytime touchdown. Washington's running back room is a little bit pedestrian. I also think, and I know you put on the outline, that Austin Eckler could get involved in this game. Good to see him back on the field producing, and maybe him as a pass catcher could be something that they do. And another way to try to stymie a pass rush. And common theme in a lot of these games is those guys have to. You need some easy throws, right? And you need the great thing about a good pass catcher is it gives you, and this is why we see, and it's so predictable, right? Third and long, what teams commonly call as a screen. It's a safe play, and it has a chance to break for a 20-yard play. And if it doesn't, then you punt. There's going to be screen passes in this game. There's going to be passes to Eckler, and there's certainly going to be a lot of Jaden Daniels in the package. So I think you have to first, if you're looking to prop this game, you have to say to yourself, how do I feel about Jaden Daniels? How is he going to beat Detroit? I do think it's going to be a Daniels game, even though I'm going to have the Lions, spoiler, winning in the end.
Yeah, and from a man coverage perspective, Jaden Daniels has also been really great this year. It's not just been the scrambling. He has the 5th best passer rating versus man coverage, 109.6, 14 touchdowns, 1 interception. Also worth noting, though, and this is where I think this is going to be key. He does have the 3rd highest pressure to sack ratio against man coverage, behind only the great Deshaun Watson and Baker Mayfield. So that's where I think if the Lions can get him on the ground, which I just don't have a lot of faith that they can, just because he's such a dynamic mover, both I think in the pocket and also when he gets out scrambling, I think he beats the 10.5 rush attempts. That's the one to me. I think, like, even if they don't turn into big gashes, either on design runs or on scrambles, I think he will scramble a bunch in this game, because that's usually his response to pressure. Is he's going to scramble or he's going to end up taking the sack. So to me, I do think the 10.5 rush attempts is the right number.
And even, I'm not sure if you can find this, but if you can find a sack prop, the one indexed number that Daniels has this year under league average, under code, is the sack rate. It's 14% worse than league average. He's well above league average and everything else. So that's, if Detroit controls this game, you would think, okay, they got Daniels to the turf, 4, 5, 6 times, or a couple of drives where, because sacks are like mini turnovers, right? And again, they, when you rattle that cage, you can hurt the quarterback's confidence, you can hurt the play caller's confidence. It's just a destructive play. A lot of times the ball ends up on the ground, so Detroit needs to, and even if Washington beats the blitz a few times, you just getting Daniels to the ground, even when he gets rid of the ball, I think is important. I'm not saying do anything dirty or anything, but just Al Davis said famously, the quarterback must go down. He must go down hard. They need Daniels on the turf one way or another in this game, just for Detroit to kind of impose its will and its statement of purpose.
Last thing on the Commanders when they have the ball, I just wrote a piece for the site. It should be up by the time this. I think it actually just literally went up like right before we started this. A piece on Terry McLaurin, which was a joy to write because it's about Terry McLaurin. But specifically, he's interesting in this game, obviously, as well. As you'd expect, he leads all of the Washington pass catchers, target on 23.5% of his routes versus man coverage. I also thought this was interesting. This was a big part of the article, like why Jaden Daniels and Terry McLaurin were such a great fit together. It was Jaden Daniels' ability and willingness to rip it on deep outside the numbers throws, and Terry McLaurin's just beautiful ability there. He leads all pass catchers this year with 387 yards on go routes this year. Fantasy Points actually quote tweeted that and said, worth noting for the weekend, the Lions have allowed the second most receiving yards per game on go routes this year, 42.8, behind only the Cleveland Browns. So as we'd expect, Scott, this obviously has to be a big Jaden Daniels game. It has to be a big Terry McLaurin game as well.
We said it all season. Just finally, so great to see Terry McLaurin linked to, I would have been happy for an acceptable quarterback, but now he's linked to a star quarterback. And so he can be the star that he always has been. It's just been shielded. He's been held down by the limitations of the quarterback play around him, but that's no longer a problem. And it's glorious because we love Terry McLaurin, just one of the smartest receivers in the league. And we saw this year, as you talked about, with him getting deep, he can run. He's not a specialty guy with the routes. He can basically run everything in the tree.
Yeah, and 23.5 is the longest reception for Terry McLaurin.
Yeah,
I think he can.
over, man.
I think he could potentially get over that one, or he's going to at least have to. I think if we're going to get out of here with a Commanders win. Let's move to when the Lions have the ball. Oh, I just wanted to throw a shout out to De'Ami Brown, who also got a shout out from Cliff Kingsbury this week. Brown is also targeted pretty decently high. He's the only other Washington pass catchers are over 20% targets per route run on against man coverage. So he's somebody to watch in this game. Although I don't know if I have the stomach to bet on De'Ami Brown.
I was going to mention De'Ami Brown, but then it was going to remind me of how I loved the Zacchaeus prop last week, but I underestimated how much Brown would play and how well he would play. He just had his best game of the season, 589 to touchdown. But it can't all be McLaurin. The Lions have actually defended the tight ends pretty well this year, so maybe Zach Ertz is not a great fantasy play, but if Washington wins, they also probably need a splash play from, I would think, Brown, maybe Zacchaeus. Somebody other than McLaurin has to be a factor. We talked about Eckler maybe getting involved. Who is that second pitch in the Washington game plan as they try to hang with Detroit on Saturday night?
Let's talk about when the Lions have the ball. I want to talk about, of course, I want to talk about Jahmyr Gibbs. Obviously, David Montgomery is going to be back in this game, but this sets up really well to me as the Lions are going to pound the shit out of the ball game, Scott, and I think they're going to do it a lot with Jahmyr Gibbs too. A bunch of stats here on the Commanders' run defense. They've allowed the second most yards before contact per rush this year. So you're going to get a lot of runway before a Commanders player touches you. They have the 7th lowest stuff rate, which is coinciding with that. They've allowed the most yards per carry on gap scheme runs. We know the Lions can get into a lot of good gap looks and blow things open. The Commanders have also allowed the 5th most explosive rushing yards on runs off the left and right end and up the C gap, so off tackle runs there. I can just picture Jahmyr Gibbs getting to the line of scrimmage and exploding out of that C gap there. To me, I just see that so clearly in this game, which is actually, I think, why this game could end up going under the total. Had an interesting, James Coe was the one who pitched this to me yesterday, and I could kind of see this here just because the Lions, I think, will try to really establish that run game. They'll score points off it, of course, but very similar to the way we thought Week 18 was going to set up as a potential shootout. It didn't because Jahmyr Gibbs kind of controlled that game early on there.
Man, was he fabulous. With David Montgomery back, I think there might be a misguided notion that, okay, the backfield platoon is back. Gibbs can do what he does. Montgomery can do what he does. Montgomery came back earlier than his scheduled time off. He wants to be a factor in the playoff run. He wants to play in the Super Bowl. All admirable things. We love David Montgomery. But I think there's an element of the genie's out of the bottle with Jahmyr Gibbs, and they can't totally stuff that back in the bottle. I think it's going to be like a 70-30 split or a 65-35 split where Gibbs is certainly the heavier toucher of the ball. Washington has the 5th highest blitz rate, as you noted in the outline. That sets up perfectly. What do you do against the blitz? You set up screens. You set up seam throws. Jameson Williams could be a factor here. But my first thought in this game is that Jahmyr Gibbs is going to eat again. I mean, the Washington defense, 20th in DVOA, 23rd pass, 26th run. So there's a lot of openings for you, a lot of avenues to choose. But the player that Gibbs has been since the Montgomery injury, I just don't think you can put that back in the box. Montgomery will play some, and it's nice that Gibbs doesn't have to, have a 30-touch game, but I think he's going to sail over 20 touches and be the most impactful player here.
I did find it funny. I don't know if you watched this, but after the Week 18 game, they told Jahmyr Gibbs that he touched the ball a lot. And he first question was, how many times I touched? And they said, it was however many it was in the game, which was a ton. And he goes, whoa. Yeah, kind of in a way of I felt it. So I do think just having Montgomery around to take some of that away. Every selfish fantasy player wants the running back to touch the ball a bajillion times, and almost every running back is please God, get a little bit, get a little bit off my plate. I think that there's that play at play here with Gibbs. They probably don't want him doing that all the time. Having Montgomery back just to take some grinder carries is great, but rushing plus receiving yard prop on BetMGM 113.5. That's the one to me with Gibbs, because I like your point about the blitz. And yeah, Washington 5th highest blitz rate in the league, 6th most man coverage. I'll talk about Jameson Williams here in a second, but Gibbs could be in play against these looks as well on screens and things like that.
And when we talk about beating the blitz, what does that require? A quarterback with poise, a quarterback who knows how to read the defense's intention before the snap, a quarterback who can make a very quick decision and a very accurate throw after the snap. And that's Goff. Goff is never late to a meeting, right? Goff is the most reliable quarterback in the league. And there's been some talk about where would Ben Johnson go to this team, to that team. Well, that quarterback isn't reliable. That quarterback is going to drive him crazy. Where he's had Goff, who always does what he wants him to do when he wants him to do it. And so I think there's going to be definitely some blitz busting plays for the Lions because they're just well equipped to do that. We know, of course, their offensive line is outstanding as well. But Jared Goff is he knows there's going to be big opportunity. Again, Williams is the guy I come to because Goff so often is accurate on those seam throws and he sets up his receivers to get yak. So a dig route or a slant that could easily be like an 8 or 10 yard gain can be a 30-yard gain, or can be a play that Williams takes to the house and then gets a fine for excessive celebration or something like that because he's Jameson Williams. He's a one-man bingo card. But it's just been fun to finally see him spread his wings and be a full-fledged, full-made man in this Detroit offense.
That's such a great point about Ben Johnson and Jared Goff and that dynamic, because obviously every Bears fan in the world is trying to wish cast him to Chicago. And, I think Caleb Williams can be good in time, but that's going to be a real case of whiplash if he goes from this version of Jared Goff to the version of Caleb Williams that we saw last year. And not to say that it can't work out and it wouldn't be wonderful and like we shouldn't all be rooting for it, but that's a great point about Goff. I'm glad you brought up Jameson Williams, who I do think is a player I want to take the over on 55.5 receiving yards in this game. Williams, team high 2.54 yards per route run against man coverage. The Commanders play the sixth most man coverage overall. 50% of his catches have come on explosive receptions against man coverage. That's 16 plus yards. I love Scott just painted it freaking perfectly, which is that inbreaker that he's just going to catch it at 10 yards and it's going to become 40 yards. I can see that going here as well. Williams also, this is a little bit of a change, and I think it's mostly because of the big plays. 3.13 yards per route run when Jared Goff is blitzed this year. That is the highest on the team. St. Brown still has, the team high target share. He's typically been Jared Goff's blitz beater, but it's come down from like almost over 30% at times to 25.7%. So there's a lot of ways the Lions can beat this defense. I do think this defense has played better, no question, better than expected, and has actually gotten better over the course of the year. But the man coverage, the way Marshawn Lattimore played last week, like Mikey Sanders still, who's probably more of a slot corner, but is kicked outside. I think he can get worked by Williams in this one. And obviously the run game stuff that we talked about too. I am ultimately taking Detroit, and I am going to take them minus 9.5 in this game. But if it was 10 or something, I might take Washington. But ultimately, I do think they win this game I'm not going to say convincingly, like they're going to blow out Washington. I think Washington will be in the game, but there's just so many avenues that their offense can get rolling in this game.
Yeah, it's hard for me to see Detroit not scoring a bunch of points. I'm thinking something like Detroit 34, Washington 24.
Yeah, I think I see that as well. And would you want to go over or under this game?
I realize the over has been a fool's errand. Only one game went over in the first 6, but I think this game's going to push over.
I think I'll go slightly under. I mean, 55.5 is big. I'll go slightly under on that one. But let's take our first break. When we come back, we'll talk through the 2 games that are going to happen on Sunday right after this.
Introducing Daily Draw, the latest free-to-play game from Yahoo Sports. Daily Draw gives you a pack of 6 prediction cards every day based on the day's biggest sporting event. Download or update the Yahoo Sports app on the Apple App Store or Google Play and join the action with Daily Draw today.
All right, we're back. Let's talk through the 2 Sunday games that are happening here in the divisional round, starting with the Los Angeles Rams coming off a big victory going to Philadelphia to take on the Eagles. The Eagles are 6-point home favorites. We got a 44-point total in this game. Scott, what are we looking at when the Rams have the ball?
They finished the season so well with wins, and at one point they were 1-4, and they looked like, are they going to sell at the trade deadline? And they've turned that around, but it hasn't really been the offense, right? I mean, let's not count Week 18, which was a go through the motions game.
Yeah,
they had 292 yards of offense against Minnesota. They had 257 yards of offense against the Cardinals, 242 yards of offense against the Jets, 302 yards of offense against San Francisco. These are all wins because the defense has gotten better and because Stafford hasn't turned the ball over, but they haven't been making explosive plays. I was really encouraged to see Tyler Higbee. I know he got hurt in the Minnesota game. There's no reason to force him back in, but he was fantastic for the first maybe, 15, 20 minutes. It looked like Tyler Higbee 2019 when he just crushed fantasy leagues in December. I mean, Cooper Kupp at 4 or 5 weeks in a row, he hasn't really done anything. And the Rams, Philadelphia, we know that their defense is outstanding at everything, right? I mean, they've been number one DVOA for a long time, and they have no weaknesses. They have playmakers on all three levels. The only bad thing I think you can say about the Eagles defense is they just seem to lose a key player every week, right? There's a lot of personnel missing, but that's every team in January. We talked about how hard it is when a team plays well, a team doesn't play well. How much of it is the good team? How much of it is the bad team? Maybe Sean McVay, the mentor, doesn't lose to the apprentice, Kevin O'Connell, stuff like that. They beat the Vikings twice this year, but I'm thinking that Rams win might have been more about they pantsed Minnesota. They're not going to pants the Eagles defense. Now, the Eagles offense is a different story. We'll get to that later, but I don't have a lot of confidence in the Rams moving the ball consistently.
Yeah, I think, spoiler alert for me, one of my favorite bets in this game is the under as well on this one, 44 points. I think that both these teams are going to have their issues, but particularly the Rams, where I think their offense is still very efficient. They just don't make they do not create a lot of big plays. And this is a defense that does not allow you to create a lot of big plays. And obviously what we saw last week, mostly in the first half, like the offense did slow down once again in the second half. And obviously one of the points that got put on the board was a fumble return for a touchdown for the LA Rams. This offense in the first half against Minnesota was really, really hyper efficient. The Tyler Higbee stuff, obviously some Puka and some decent play from the run game as well. But a lot of it is because that was a very favorable matchup. And I wish we had talked about this more, Scott, because we were definitely heavy on the Vikings last week, and the Rams certainly surprised us, particularly that defense. But Stafford is really good. He's been rough under pressure this year, but he's been great against the blitz. 10th in EPA per dropback and 9th in adjusted yards per attempt versus the blitz in the regular season, not even counting what we saw last week against the Vikings. The Vikings, of course, are number one in blitz rate this year. The Eagles are 28th. When they send blitzes, they're good at it, but they don't have to send blitzes to disrupt the picture. The Nakobe Dean injury, I think, will be big. He's the linebacker who's going to miss the rest of the postseason, had a nice breakout year this year. And obviously Sean McVay can he can rip one of your backups up if you don't scheme it around, and I do think that's going to be key over the middle passing. But I'm less confident in Stafford having a monster performance this week than last week.
Oh, me too. I mean, it helps so much that I realized they got the opening kickoff against Minnesota, went right down the field and scored, so they created leverage for themselves. But I think for the Rams to win this game, they need to be in the lead. They need to be playing from a position of strength. They need to be dictating the terms. They need to have their whole playbook available. They can't get one-dimensional. They can't have to chase the game. Now, I talked all last week. I feel like Bud Fox in Wall Street, who stayed up all night for a couple of stocks. He gives them the gecko, and they end up being lousy stocks. I was so confident in that first quarter under with the Eagles and the Packers, and I still think it was the right side. But Philadelphia generally doesn't run away from teams early on. They struggle to get Hurts in a rhythm. A turnover helped them last week. They had a very short scoring drive. He makes the nice throw to Dotson and all that, but it wasn't a great Hurts game. There's a lot to unpack on the Eagles offense, but I think it's critical for the Rams to get off to a good start. They cannot fall behind in this game, and they can't their playbook can't shrink. They have to have diversity. They have to be able to threaten Philadelphia with their whole playbook, and if they get behind, they won't be able to do that.
It's a great call. And I think getting a lot of Puka Nacua early big plays will be a big part of it. Obviously, he had a big play right off the bat against Minnesota. He also had a lot of, this is from Next Gen Stats, he had a bunch of his production lined up tight to the line of scrimmage against this Eagles team, which is, I think, what you're going to have to do. You're not going to bang them on the perimeter. You're going to have to move him around. He's going to have to be the movable chess piece to get really going. And I do think that's obviously going to have to be a big focal point for this offense. But let's flip it to the other side of the ball, because there is a lot to unpack when the Eagles have the ball. You mentioned it, Scott. Rough kind of showing from Jalen Hurts last week, but was it rusty? I think the Packers also just had a great defensive game plan, but the Rams are coming off of a great defensive week as well. On the flip side, though, I think there's almost, and we'll unpack this, but I think there's almost no chance that they can do what they did to Minnesota last week against this particular Eagles offense. And we've already seen a game where there's only one game this week that we haven't seen these two teams face off each other, which was the game we just covered before the break, Lions Commanders. The last time these two teams played, it was classic Eagles. Superstars did superstar things. AJ Brown ripped them up on vertical passes, and obviously Saquon Barkley was a monster. Per Next Gen Stats, gained 162 of his career high 255 rushing yards after contact against the Rams in Week 12. Most of his career, second most by any player in a game this season. Only the great Dameon Pierce, 174 in Week 18, had more yards after contact in a game. So the Rams got to limit the superstars in this game, but can they do it?
Can they do it? Indeed. last week I was banging the drum on, well, I think the Vikings will rebound because the Rams have the worst defense per DVOA in the playoffs. Still true, of course. The Rams are 26th on DVOA, but they have some young talent that is rounded into form. So maybe this is an age-old question. When you want to evaluate the strength of a team or a unit, do you use the full season? Do you weight the latter part of the season more? Do you just focus on the latter part of the season? And there's a lot of different approaches to that. Of course, everything is matchup dependent. And just to put a point on Hurts and that first quarter, second quarter stuff, I mean, first quarter of this year, he's thrown 2 touchdown passes. His YPA is 6.8. It's 7.4, 9.6, and 9.1 in the other 4 quarters. So I don't know if it's nerves. I don't know if the play calling opens up. But for whatever reason, Jalen Hurts doesn't come out strong. Last week, they got that gift scoring drive. But, turns out Hurts actually had the better part of his game early on last week that went against their trends. And he's got 7 games this year under 200 passing yards, not counting week 18. It's never a shock when the Eagles win. It's like, oh, what Hurts do? 168, threw for a touchdown, ran for a touchdown. That's kind of the season he's had. It ultimately comes down to this for me, Matt. If you're going to make a case for the Rams, you have to tell me their defense is better, that you don't care about the season stats, that guys have grown into roles, that they found a groove, and they're coming in here with nothing to win, that the pressure's all on the Eagles. We know the Philadelphia crowd will turn on the Eagles if they're down at the end of the quarter or something like that. So if you think the Rams have a puncher's chance, you have to tell me that, no, this is actually a league average defense now. Maybe it's a little bit better than that, and don't tell me what they were when they were stumbling to that 1-4 start. So tell me this. How do you come down on what is the best snapshot? And it could everything's situational in the NFL. Everything's contextual. But when you think of the snapshot that best illustrates a team statistically, what type of thing are you looking for?
I do try to weight like more recent performances. And we'll talk about this actually with the defense in the next game as well, that I think it's important to weight the more recent performances than the full course of the season. And with the Rams, I think it makes a lot of sense too, because this is a very, very young team. It is the least expensive defense in the NFL because they have so many young players on that side, a lot of rookies as well. Of course, Braden Fisk and Jared Verse are the headliners over there after being drafted this past year. And they have a first-year defensive coordinator in Chris Shula. It's the type of group, Scott, that you would think trends up. I think especially when you can pinpoint it to something, and again, this will come up in the next game as well, when you could pinpoint it to something like, hey, young players growing, or like personnel mixed up, things like that, then I think it is really instructive to use that kind of that snapshot of a season.
Totally fair. I like it when there's a lot of young players on defense. We talk all the time about, I said it with Xavier Worthy, what Rasheed Rice did last year. Jalen McMillan's season trended upward at the end of the year, although he didn't do a lot last week. Young players get better. They're not really rookies at this time of the year. So you look at some of the young talent on this defense, and it makes a lot of sense that they're playing better. But another thing is, I want to see. I know A.J. Brown says he's fine with it. A.J. Brown's been a flashpoint guy all week. He's reading a book on the sidelines, which I think is great. I love people who are wired differently, especially when it's a thoughtful wiring differently. But what a weird season for A.J. Brown. Is he getting along with Jalen Hurts? No, we're fine. But there's so many games where he gets the Titan target share. And I want the 8, 10, 12 targets off the bus target share. This Eagles team is not wired like that. They will never say this, but they don't want Jalen Hurts really to be the centerpiece of passing Jalen Hurts to be the centerpiece of their offense. They never approach it that way. Their play calling screams to you what they think of their passing game. And to me, it's frustrating because I want A.J. Brown to spread his wings and do A.J. Brown things. I think he can. I just wonder how much he's being hurt by the game planning and how they're trying to manage Jalen Hurts in a box right now.
Yeah, shout out to Jim Murphy. Inner Excellence, the book that A.J. Brown was reading on the sideline, is like launched up to be the bestseller on Amazon or whatever. So shout out to Jim Murphy, who called it a great honor that this has happened to him. I bet it's been a great honor.
Has anybody read Reception Perception on the sideline during?
I know. I was thinking I need
What's
to get
in
a
those
copy.
tablets, Matt? We need some investigative work on this.
I need to like have a book. And I got to get it in one of these receivers. I got to get it in A.J. Brown's hands. I got to get it. Unfortunately, I don't think they want to read about routes. I think they want to read about this motivational stuff. And I'm not your guy for motivational.
If you were reading a book on the sidelines, what would you be reading?
Oh my God, great question.
Well, think about that. I'll say my favorite book. I've said this many times before is Ball 4, the book that Jim Bouton wrote for an expansion team. Knuckleballer, outsider. He blew his arm out. He was trying to hang on literally by his fingertips. And it's a very perceptive story about group culture and about where baseball was at before the players really had any leverage in the Players Association. I try to read that book about once a year, Ball 4.
I think the book, I'm going to pull it out here, by the way, so shout out to folks on YouTube. I think I'm probably reading this book here, one of my favorites, the ultimate worst case scenario survival handbook. So, anything can happen over the course of the game, especially the worst case scenario. This one's a banger. A lot of good stuff in here.
That's more like, well, if Behrens is unavailable and you have to tape with Pianowski, how do I get through that hour? That's going to be 15 minutes
that's actually,
too long.
Scott, that is page
3.
51. 51 is what to do. Page 51 is how to treat a sunburn, how to deal with insomnia, and how to cure the hiccups.
Give me that book again. Give me the title again.
The Ultimate Worst Case Scenario Survival Guide.
Oh, so good.
I don't think we're going to launch it up to the top of the charts on Amazon like we did for like Jim Murphy and Inner Excellence did, but by David Borgenite, maybe Joshua Pevin and Ben H. Winters. 400 scenarios from all the best-selling books.
So what's the worst case scenario for the Eagles? How do the Rams steal this game?
So I think the worst scenario for the Eagles is that defensive performance last week that we saw is it does carry over. The problem, Scott, is that I think what they did against Minnesota, like I said, does not map well to Philadelphia's passing offense, because we saw them flip from a lot of zone, a lot of cover 3 to they jumped up to man coverage on 30%. They used cover 1 on 26% of their snaps, which was a big increase. They blitzed on 10 of 29 dropbacks, but obviously they got most of their sacks with the 4-man rush. Jalen Hurts, to his credit, is actually the 7th highest adjusted yards per attempt versus the blitz this year. And just all that man coverage, things like that, that's where A.J. Brown's going to tear you up. So I actually think this is a big A.J. Brown game, and I will take the over on 70.5 receiving yards for him.
I get teased once or twice a season where Dallas Goedert has a couple of big plays, and I'm back in. Like that stiff arm he had for that touchdown, that rambling run that he had. Then Josh Jacobs had a terrific run after that play. Are we going to be seduced by Goddard props this week, or is she going to go into hibernation for a couple more games?
I can't do it. Not for me. I do think that it's going to have to be a big receiver. Yeah, there's no Dallas Goedert props up this week on BetMGM yet. Well, there's catches, 3.5 catches, if that tickles your fancy.
The Rams have allowed a lot of volume to tight ends this year. That isn't always symbolic. I mean, there could be a lot of noise in there. Sometimes it's second tight ends, third tight ends. It's not opponent adjusted, those raw stats, but I do think that stuff's available. It's just the problem with the Goddard prop is that he could literally have no targets or one target in the game. That's always going to be in play with him.
I completely jacked up all my books here now. I'm a mess. I've also got
like
football shorts. I love 1,001 of the game's funniest.
I still love reading something in my hands, or plane ride, or 3:00 afternoon, late lunch in a restaurant with a book. I'm not a Kindle guy. I'd rather read the actual book in my hands.
I actually got my wife got me a Kindle, so I'm trying to read more. And I find it a little easier to fall asleep reading the Kindle than falling asleep reading a giant book. And I'm trying to no phones at bedtime this year. So okay. Anyways, but I'm just glad I had something other to say than Harry Potter when I had that when I had the books. Anyways, let's move on from books. Let's move on from this game. But before we do, let's pick it. What do we think here?
Rams are going to lose. And the Eagles are going to cover too. It's going to be close. The Eagles will pull away late. I'm saying Eagles by 10 and under.
I say literally the exact same. So that's definitely not what's going to happen, because I'm with you. Under and Eagles -6 and Eagles win. All right, so let's move to what might be the headliner of the weekend, because we've got the two MVP favorites facing off each other. Baltimore Ravens at Buffalo Bills, 51.5 point total in this one, and the Bills are 1-point home dogs, Scott. So let's talk about when the Ravens have the ball. Before we get into any of the advanced stuff here, how is Derrick Henry not just going to run all over this Bills defense? Again, they're obviously one of the softer, lighter defenses in the league. They play a lot of nickel, and we've seen Derrick Henry smash this team before. 127 yards out of the pistol in week 4. He also has 46 carries for 428 yards and 2 touchdowns. Most yards per carry by any rusher with at least 20 carries out of the pistol this season. And I see a lot of that coming here this week.
I did too. Yeah. Let's throw the big beef up against the short defensive front, the light defensive front. And Buffalo is basically going to give it to you anyway. Henry, we know his career yards per carry, it just tends to increase from September, October, November, December, and then January, of course. He's a better as the season gets along back, and he was really explosive when these teams met. It was a while ago, week 4, week 5, something like that, where Baltimore absolutely destroyed Buffalo on a Sunday night game, I should say. Henry had a $199, a touchdown. He had the 87-yard touchdown run. Lamar, 135 rating. He didn't throw that many passes. He had 3 total touchdowns. Buffalo's defense has been better as they've gotten healthier. 11th in DVOA, 14th pass, 8th rush. I don't feel like it's quite as good as maybe those metrics might suggest. I think it's an average defense, and they're going to catch a big break. I don't know, as we're taping this on Thursday morning, I'm not sure what the Zay Flowers status is. That's a huge break.
Huge one.
For Buffalo if Flowers can't go. But I think it's interesting that Baltimore's favored in this game. I think they should be favored in this game because I don't know how they're going to keep Baltimore under 400 yards of offense.
Right. That's the thing here, too, is that we can talk, obviously, the Derrick Henry stuff, but also great matchup for Lamar Jackson, particularly in the passing game. The Ravens quarterback, Lamar Jackson, has thrown for 2,989 yards, 23 touchdowns, and just 3 picks against zone coverage, league high passer rating, and yards per attempt 9.5 against a defense here in Buffalo, 8th most zone coverage. And obviously the biggest winner against zone is Zay Flowers, who I actually charted last year for reception perception as one of the top 3 performers against zone coverage, period. Really good at uncovering against zone. And he has, of course, got the team high 2.28 yards per route run versus zone. But Scott, like Rashad Bateman has a 15.4 air yards per target against zone. He's made big plays against zone coverage. Justice Hill, target on 6 of his 11 routes run in week 4 against the Bills, team high target rate in that game by any running back with at least 10 routes in a game this season. So he was key, and he's second on the team in targets versus zone coverage overall. There is a lot of answers, even if they don't have Zay Flowers. And right now, I would bet that even if he plays, 0% chance he's 100%. Like just flat out 0, even if he plays. And still, even then, that's their number 1 receiver, a guy that went to the Pro Bowl this year. Hate the Pro Bowl, hate him getting the nod if you want. Maybe it should have gone to Brian Thomas. Doesn't matter. He's their number 1 receiver, and they still have all these other answers against zone coverage.
Who thought that after 2 MVP seasons, Lamar Jackson could get better? He just had his best season. I don't know what they're going to do with the MVP. I know Jackson was the All-Pro quarterback, and usually when he wins it as comfortably as he did, that's usually a slam dunk to win MVP too, but I don't know if maybe the fatigue kicks in or people just want to give a Lifetime Achievement Award to Josh Allen's had a fantastic season. I just don't know how you can say it's better than Jackson's season, but we'll see what the voters say. But I don't know how you Jackson's on such a roll right now. He's never been better at making pocket throws and making on schedule stuff. We always know he can Lamar stuff when a play breaks down, and Bateman's gotten better when a play breaks down, and Flowers can kill you when a play breaks down. Isaiah Likely is just a big tight end receiver, hybrid player. He's dangerous in those situations. Justice Hill, you mentioned, got them in the first meeting. You're just screwed with Lamar Jackson. Either their play works or their ad-lib play probably works too. And I don't know how Buffalo can keep them. Buffalo should do a rain dance, a snow dance, a sleet dance. It's not like the Bills are a bad team. I'm not trying to make it out like this is a David and Goliath game. I mean, the spread is essentially even. But I wasn't surprised that Baltimore was favored because since they fixed their defense, they were horrible. We'll get to that in a second. But this was they only had 2 good defensive games in their first 10. One of them, ironically, was against Buffalo when they met the first time. But now that Baltimore has a defense, I think they're the AFC's best team, clearly. And it's a benefit to the other teams in the conference that they have to do it on the road because they lost all those silly games early in the season. But I think Baltimore's awfully, awfully good. And I think they're going to show it on Sunday night.
Baltimore had 2, I would say, moments over the course of the season, especially early on. Number 1, it was the defense, which, as you mentioned, we're going to talk about it. It got fixed. The second thing is that their offensive line really struggled in week 1, and that also contributed, I think, to some more unfounded concerns about the pass catchers. Well, that has also been fixed. This offensive line is really good now. Roger Rosengarten, coming off a great performance, rookie right tackle against TJ Watt in the previous game. And I know Watt has, and I highlighted this, has not been productive in the back half of the year, but still, he's still one of the more premier edge rushers in the league. Rosengarten playing very well. Ronnie Stanley playing the best football he's played since the injury over on the left side. Some of the interior has been good. That line has been fixed, and then that has made it clear they do have a lot of answers at pass catcher, whether it's Bateman, obviously Flowers if he's available. Justice Hill has just been like an A-plus role player for them. And Isaiah Likely, who if there's no Flowers, I like the over on 34.5 receiving yards for Isaiah Likely. Obviously, that's going to change if there's no Flowers. So maybe you want to take that now just on the off chance Flowers doesn't play.
Yeah, I would take that now. I would still stand behind it even if Flowers did come back. But Likely was very impactful in the game last week, even though they didn't need to throw proactively in the second half. I think he'll be a factor in this game.
Let's move it to where the Bills have the ball. And they definitely do not have the same level of like, oh man, matchup advantages against this Ravens defense. Because as we mentioned, the Ravens are second in EPA per play allowed since week 10, which if I told you that was going to happen in week 3, week 4, Scott, I think you would have been shocked. And there's just so many good metrics on their defense. And again, it's pinpointing that there's a thing that happened here. They moved Kyle Hamilton to safety. Eddie Jackson's out. Marcus Williams out. Kyle Hamilton's at safety. That's then allowed them to play Marlon Humphrey more as the slot corner. Nate Wiggins, their rookie corner, has also grown over the course of the year. Our colleague Kyle Van Noy, shout out to McCoy and Van Noy podcast. People should download, listen to it. He's been having a revival season, like a career best season at this point in his career. There's a lot you can point to why this defense got better. They're 11th fewest yards per game allowed to outside receivers since week 10. That's a tough matchup for Buffalo. 7th fewest yards allowed to slot receivers since then. So they're actually even better against interior players, which sucks because that's where the best players are for Buffalo, like Khalil Shakir, obviously. 12th most catches allowed to players lined up in the backfield, however. So maybe this is a big James Cook game. 3rd lowest receptions and catch rate allowed on deep passes overall. So Scott, I would throw it to you this way. I don't think the Ravens are going to be able to, or I don't think the Ravens will give up a lot of ground to James Cook, who's had a great season. Their run defenses, even when the defense struggled, their run defense was good all year. So he's going to have to make it work in the passing game. And man, if Amari Cooper was ever going to have a game, or if Curtis Samuel was ever going to have an encore to what he did last year, the new guys that they brought in, it has to be this week, because I just think that's key. Like, they're going to have to reverse those stats we just talked about with deep passes. They're going to have to get those in this game.
Yeah, Buffalo, just 236 yards of offense in that first meeting against the Baltimore team that hadn't found itself yet. I'm so glad you brought up Kyle Van Noy. Again, the podcast is great. He was always a good player. I enjoyed his time in New England. Was a Lion to start his career, but sets a career high for sacks at age 32 with 9 last year. And then he gets 12.5 this year at age 33. So he's getting smarter. He's getting deployed really well on this defense. And I love that Baltimore, they can get you with different people. They can do it with games. They can do it with straight defense. The shift of Hamilton and the back end has really brought things together. Ultimately, Buffalo has to ask itself this. Okay, where is our big play downfield? Is it a Coleman play? Is it a Samuel play? Is it what's left of Amari Cooper? He's been a bust since they traded for him. He just hasn't been reliable. We know they rotate their receivers, which makes them so difficult for fantasy purposes because nobody's going to have a big target share or route share. Some teams play that way, but I think you need a lead singer in this passing game. I love Shakir for what he is. He's a slot guy. He occasionally will run downfield routes, but they need to be cooking up something. If Buffalo wins this game, it's going to be like, oh my God, who saw that Keon Coleman game coming? Or, oh my God, Amari Cooper, after doing nothing for a month, but looking like he was a retired player in the NFL, he actually came back to life. I don't see it. Maybe Dalton Kincaid, who's been just a fantasy wrong answer for the whole season. Maybe they get him going. Because you can't ask Allen to win this game by himself. He's going to need downfield help. And I wish I could feel good about any of these receivers. Is there somebody you can put a chip on? Is somebody you want to talk yourself into?
I actually just want to talk myself out of Khalil Shakir, who 53.5. I would take the under on 53.5 because I do think it's going to have to be someone else. And I think it will have to be, I just don't think he's going to have those same big yards after catch plays. Like, can he catch, 6 passes for 50 yards in this game? Definitely, because I think that's how Buffalo is going to have to win this game. They're going to have to matriculate the ball down the field, because I don't think it's going to be Keon Coleman, on these kind of, I think the Ravens are too disciplined in the secondary to allow those bigger plays. Allen is a freak show. He can do whatever he wants, but maybe that's how they give it up. They give up those, scramble plays, but Coleman doesn't match up well with the secondary. I don't think Amari Cooper is making those big plays and at the catch point, right? The Ravens have really tightened that up. So it's going to have to be like I said, matriculate the ball down the field. I think Allen's going to have a lot of completions in this game, but I don't know there's going to be a lot of big plays.
And what I want you to do as soon as you finish this podcast is do a Yahoo search on matriculate the ball down the field and just watch that great Hank Stram 10-second clip.
That's
yes,
right.
He's misusing the term, but it sounds like it's right? It should be good. It should be it should be an SAT acceptable answer. They even give the SAT anymore. I love that matriculating the ball down the field. 65 toss power trap. Yeah. NFL films, just the greatest thing. It's the greatest thing since Serial.
Josh Allen took 3 sacks in this game against the Ravens, most in any game this year. He only took 14 sacks all year, which is insane. 2.82 sack rate this year, what a transformation from his rookie season where he was sacked on 8.1% of his dropbacks. Like, he looked like a guy who might have a sack problem. Definitely not. He's one of the best sack beaters in the league. So I think Josh Allen can take over any game. And if the Bills win this game, if Allen has a takeover moment, 0% surprised from me on this one. But I do think that this is going to have to, like I said, be a matriculate game, be a lot of James Cook catches. A lot of these receivers are going to have to get activated in some way. But I just don't see a lot of big plays allowed in this game either.
I have Baltimore winning by a touchdown. So I'm sure you've discussed this already. We don't have time to get into it. So I just want answers here. Okay. Who should win the MVP? Who will win the MVP? I'm going to say Lamar Jackson should. And even though it sounds totally crazy because he just won AP first team or all pro quarterback, I think they're going to give it to Josh Allen the MVP. So I would vote for Jackson. Nothing against Allen. I think Jackson's had a better season. I think Allen will win. Jackson should win. What say you?
I think that Jackson should win. I think he will win.
Okay.
Yeah, I talked about it. If people want my full rationalization, I talked about it on Football 301, but I just think he's played at a different level this year, which is no disrespect to Josh Allen, who has been one of my favorite players in the league for a long, long time. That's well documented on this show and many others. I just think that, again, Lamar has played at a slightly different level this year. And I don't listen to any arguments about discredit, look at the guys that Lamar has versus the guys that Buffalo has. Both of these rosters are very, very good with 2 of the best run games in the NFL, with 2 of the best offensive coordinators in the NFL. My other prediction, Scott, is that Jacksonville Jaguars are going to hire Joe Brady to be their head coach by the time this cycle ends. And also, Kellen Moore will be the Cowboys head coach. Those are my 2 predictions.
I like that. I don't think Deion Sanders would work in Dallas, but man, it would be fun. It would be crazy. It would be chaotic. They got
their headlines. They got their headlines out of it. Now they're gonna hire Kellen Moore. I meant to say that jokingly and not jokingly, pretty seriously. When we talked to the Eagles, so I wanted to get that on the record. But in terms of on the record, I'm also going Ravens in this game. I think the over is probably in play as well. 51.5, I think, is potentially in play. My concern is just that the Ravens are going to be able to run the ball. So, yeah, I don't know. I ultimately, I don't have a confident over-under in this game, but I do think the Ravens win.
They're going to the Super Bowl, man.
All right, we're going to take our final break. Then when we come back, we will throw out some props on the other side of it right after this. All right, we're back. Final segment here on our divisional round preview show. Welcome to Prop It Up. Scott and I have 4 props here for you. We may have talked a little bit about these, but we're going to really dive into it here on this particular segment. So, Scott, give me your 2 favorite props for the divisional round this weekend.
Yeah, I think Jahmyr Gibbs, genie out of the bottle. A lot of different ways to punch it. You mentioned maybe total yards was the way to go. I'm going to go over 24.5 receiving yards. They look to keep that Washington pass rush and blitz package at bay. I think it's a 70-30, 80-20, 65-35 split with him and Montgomery. It's not going to be anything close to the 50-50. Montgomery isn't 100% yet. They're going to have to be judicious how they use him. He's just going to be a change of pace guy. And it just gives, again, what they've seen, doesn't go back in a box. I couldn't find a receiving prop, a yardage prop for Tyler Higbee, but I did see touchdown anytime, plus 430. Maybe you want to go with the yardage. It's obviously health dependent because he did leave that game against Minnesota and didn't play the latter stages, but he looked so good in the first quarter especially. And the way Cooper Kupp's playing right now, I know you have a stance on that. I mean, he's like 31 or 32 going on 40, it feels like. I think Tyler Higbee needs to be involved. So I'm interested in Higbee props. I have the touchdown stand in at plus 430, but maybe the catches or yards might be more your speed once we get closer to game day.
I really like the Tyler Higbee anytime touchdown. It was clear there was purposeful usage for him, and the broadcast continued to talk about how excited that McVay was to get Tyler Higbee back. That signals a lot to me there, that clearly they were talking to Sean McVay about that. So it actually dovetails perfectly into my favorite prop this week, which is Cooper Kupp under 40.5 receiving yards at -115. Here's the reality. His last 4 games, including the playoffs, 0 yards, 24 yards, 29 yards on 1 catch, and 29 yards on 1 catch. That's 2 weeks in a row, 1 catch, 29 yards. And I don't think he had a catch in the first half of that Vikings game, period. Like, he has just not been a factor in the offense, and there's multiple reasons why. Number one is I think he's an older declining player. Like, Puka Nacua is just straight up, it's been clear all year long when Puka's been healthy. But I think like that he's better, that Puka's better. Now I think Puka's just way better, like significantly better than Cooper Kupp. So that's number one. Number two, the fact that they're just a little inconsistent on offense. We talked about it when we discussed that game, that they're not a big play offense. They're not a speed-based offense. Cooper Kupp, obviously not a speed-based player as well. So that's another issue here. There's really just enough room for one guy in this offense right now, and that one guy is probably Puka Nacua, although I am interested in the Tyler Higbee stuff. And the reality here is that Cooper DeJean, great slot corner, he can defend Cooper Kupp well. We've actually seen that happen already in this particular season. So Cooper Kupp under 40.5 receiving yards, I think is a good bet this weekend. And also my second one, Josh Allen over 21.5 completions here. I mentioned it that when we talked about this game, I think it's going to be a matriculate game. Let's use the word again. It's going to be a matriculate game for the Buffalo Bills passing game. The Ravens' third lowest receptions and catch rate allowed on deep passes since week 10 when their defense started to turn around. But they've given up production to players out of the backfield. I think James Cook is going to catch a lot of passes. Obviously, Khalil Shakir is a short A-dot player when Josh Allen is under pressure. And some of those outside receivers, definitely not vertical threats, but maybe they get going from a reception standpoint. I think it's not going to be a big play offense for Buffalo. I do think it will be a matriculate game for Josh Allen. So I'll go over 21.5 completions at -105 for Josh Allen.
I'll sign off on both of those. And you mentioned Kupp. I did an article this week, I think it was Wednesday, for Yahoo about the 30-something receivers. Of course, Kupp is one of those. Of the 12 most notable 30-something receivers this year, 11 of them did worse in their final fantasy grade as far as points accumulated. The only guy who actually rose was Kupp, who rose from wide receiver 39 to wide receiver 36, but that was obviously not what you paid for. Just it gets late early at this wide receiver position, and I spun it all forward. What am I doing with these guys going for 2025? It was hard to talk myself into that many. A couple players I'm okay with, but I think my days of drafting Cooper Kupp are over, and I say that very sadly because I thought he was the best player in the NFL just 3 years ago.
It happens fast, man. Things change quickly around here. It gets late early, all of those things, and I think it has gotten late early for Cooper Kupp, which is, it's crazy. We talked, you hinted at it when we talked about this Rams team, that they were potentially sellers at the deadline, and Cooper Kupp was one of the names. And then it's like, oh no, we're going on a run. So actually, let's not trade Cooper Kupp. We beat the Vikings. Let's pass off on the trade deadline. And they are going on that run. They're here in the divisional round, and Cooper Kupp is not a big reason why. So I do think, unfortunately, it's going to be under for Cooper Kupp in this particular game. And I do think that is going to do it here for us, Scott. Big, massive divisional round preview. I love this weekend. I think it's great to get all these teams together, and I think we're going to have 4 really good games and a lot of narratives coming out of it. I mean, the morning shows, the hot take artists, they can't wait to slam on either Josh Allen or Lamar Jackson, whoever loses that game. That's not what we're going to do on this show, but that is what's going to happen.
A lot of times the divisional round is the best weekend of the year. It's the final time we have 4 games on a slate. Final time we have Saturday football. So a lot of star power on the field. So, week 1 didn't deliver. Tampa Bay, Washington to the side. Thank you, Jaden Daniels. Thank you, Baker Mayfield. How did Tampa Bay lose that game, man? But this is going to deliver. This is going to be the best weekend of the playoffs.
It's always a star-studded podcast, and it always delivers when Scott Pianowski gets to join me. He is not one of the worst-case scenarios we need to survive. It's always great to have you, Scott. Looking forward to having you back as soon as possible. But that is going to do it for this show. On Monday, we are going to be back with our recap of divisional round. Andy Behrens will be in the saddle. He'll be in the co-pilot chair to join me for that. Hopefully all of you are right back here with me, and hopefully I'm not pulling anything off the shelf on the next show and creating a mess for myself to get to after the show. We'll be back on Monday. Until then, we are out.